Hello, this is Dr. Llewellyn Eisen, and for our first little video lecture for this course, I would like to begin with just a brief conversation about the study of religious history. And of course, as a backup to that, we might want to start by answering the question, why study religion at all? Well, for me, I'm a professor of religious history, and so my easy answer to why study religion is why not? I mean, for me personally, there isn't anything that is more interesting than religion, religious behaviors, religious rituals, but I realize that's not everyone's interest. So, challenging myself to come up with some other answers to the question, why study religion, here's what I came up with. First of all, religion as an object is objectively fascinating. The way people behave in the name of religion, what they claim in the name of religion, and the types of ways that they draw comfort or justification from religion. This is all just objectively fascinating. Religion is itself an interesting and colorful object of study. Second, religion is both unique and common at the same time. And what I mean by that is that all religions and all practitioners of religion are actually unique and individual, just like all individuals. But religion is also common. And by that I mean it is universal and it is worldwide. Whether somebody's engaging in a ritual that is deeply rooted in a particular religion, or whether somebody's engaging in a ritual that is rooted in their culture, independent of faith traditions, what's common to both of those situations is the need to incorporate some sort of bodily activity into one's life to give it meaning. And so, in that sense, religion, which often informs those rituals, is very common, and I find that worth studying. A third reason is that religion is important, it is relevant, and it is essential. And more specifically, what I mean by these three things is that there is social and cultural relevancy to understanding something of religion. If, for example, you are a nursing student and then go on to have a profession in the healthcare field, understanding something of the religious beliefs of your future patients is very important. If you're a business student and you go on to have a career in the world of business, understanding something of the religious beliefs of your target audience is quite important to your success. So, consequently, understanding something of the religious beliefs of the majority population of wherever you're living is going to provide you with social and cultural relevancy. So, for that reason, it's important to study religion. And then finally, I think that the study of religion is important because it's a gateway to new ways of thinking. You might be surprised to find yourself thinking about things differently after you study a particular religion. And that what you're thinking about differently might be your own religious viewpoint. It's not just the case that someone who is not religious comes to the study of religion and is suddenly made religious. That's not our job here at PLU. It's not my job as a professor of religious history. But people who have a religious background might discover in the study of religion that the study of religion has introduced them to new ways of thinking about themselves, about their religion, or their non-religious identity. So in terms of ways of studying religion, the most common ways of studying religion is to study the different groups. So by that I mean studying religion holistically. So studying Christianity or studying Islam or studying Judaism. That's very often the most common way of studying religion, and that's usually found in like a Religion 101 kind of course. A second common way of studying religion is through texts. So very often you'll find courses in the study of the Quran, or the study of New Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, or the Avestas. So studying particular groups' sacred texts is a very common way of studying religion. A third way is studying theologies. So if you were to look at lists of courses at universities, you might find courses Islamic theology, Jewish theology, and these are the belief systems of these particular groups. And then finally, a little bit less common but still present nonetheless, is the study of rituals, religious rituals among various groups. And then the study of ethics of various religious groups. And then finally, the study of histories of various religious groups. And this is the category into which we fall. Now, I have very intentionally placed the study of histories under the study of theologies, and this is something that we're going to come back to in just a minute. So keep that in mind. There are other ways to study religion too, about which we should be mindful. And that is as a practitioner of religion or as a non-practitioner of a particular religion. In the case of a practitioner, that usually presupposes a commitment to the religion, which can change how they view their object of study. Additionally, a practitioner very often has interest in the promotion of the particular religion's ideals. So, in other words, they may be more invested in the values and the beliefs and theologies of a particular religion under study than a non-practitioner. And we have to be sensitive to both views in this case. And additionally, for a practitioner of a particular religion, the study of religion itself might actually be considered an act of worship. Now, in some cases, the study of religion might be an act of betrayal among some particular religious groups, or some more hardline versions or conservative versions of particular religions. For the non-practitioner, on the other hand, they're probably not committed to the religion under study, at least religiously committed, or maybe any religion for that matter, but it doesn't mean that a non-practitioner is not committed to learning about the particular religion. So you don't want to make the assumption that someone who is not religious is somehow less interested in a particular religion. You also don't want to assume that someone who is interested in the study of religion is so because maybe they're religious. Additionally, the non-practitioner is most likely not interested in promoting the ideals of the religion that is under study. And as well, for the non-practitioner, the study of religion might still actually be something of an act of worship, even if not worship of the religion under study. For many people, the academic study of anything can be seen as a deeply spiritual or worshipful experience, whether a person is religious or not. So these are some things to keep in mind. Now, do you remember I asked you to keep the fact that the study of history was positioned underneath the study of theology, and I promised you we were coming back to that, so I'm going to fulfill that promise, and we're going to talk for just a minute about the relationship between religious history and theology. Now, the Enlightenment as a movement in world history was certainly one that challenged ideas that were built on faith, okay? The Enlightenment challenged tradition, or the adherence to tradition that, in fact, prevented progress. And the Enlightenment also sought to advance knowledge through the use of the scientific method. Now, before the Enlightenment, very often from any religious perspective, history was understood as something that supported theology. Okay? What do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that for any religious group, the way the events of the world unfolded were usually seen through their particular scriptures, or they were seen as affirming their theological worldview. And this is true really for all of the major religious groups that are currently globally active. I see here, though, that Zoroastrianism kind of got separated there, but Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, Hinduism, Baha'i, Taoism, Shintoism, Confucianism, Christianity, and Islam are all groups that have traditionally, pre-Enlightenment, understood the historical events of global history as subservient to their theological beliefs. Now, the Enlightenment introduced different ways of thinking about the study of religion and the study of history. And so post-Enlightenment tools in the study of religious history now assist us in looking at religion differently. And religious history is now its own discipline, independent of theology. So things like databases and secondary source materials, maps, encyclopedias, bibliographies, and then methods and theories are all things that help us understand and think about religious history differently. So that little sort of circular chart that I showed you earlier now can look a little bit different. Instead of theology at the center with history subservient to it, now religious history takes center stage and is understood not just through the lens of particular religious groups, but are understood through the lens of different theories or different methods. For example, environmental studies has a different approach to religious history than, say, feminist theory, because environmental studies asks different sets of questions, like, where do religious rituals take place? If a religious ritual takes place in a cathedral, is it more impactful or sacred than if it takes place in a field? How does a ritual that takes place in a field differ from one that takes place in a basement, right? So the environmental studies questions are different than those of, say, as I mentioned, feminist theory or womanist theory or queer theory, which asks questions about the role of queer people in the development of religious identity, religious historical events. And queer theory is going to ask different questions than, say, anthropology or sociology, which also have different sets of questions, like how does religious groups, or how do religious groups function in certain societies? How do they prevent growth or promote growth or support societal structures or subvert them, right? So all of these different theories and methods have different questions to ask of religious history. And so this helps us to understand the past better and get a fuller, richer, deeper understanding of what's actually going on. And believe it or not, we all kind of align ourselves with one or more of these at any given time. So when we're reading historical sources, we want to be mindful of the nature of historical sources and the nature of historical knowledge. These are different things that can help us read the texts more carefully and more thoughtfully. Our sources for this course are primarily two. We're going to be reading primary sources, which are not simply first-hand accounts, but they might also be first-time accounts, okay? So a primary source is not always written from a first-hand perspective. It's not always written by someone who has experienced what they are writing about. You have to keep that in mind, okay? So, for example, the gospel accounts weren't necessarily written by people who were there, okay? But they were first-time accounts, all right? So, additionally, primary sources are discipline-specific. So, what I mean by that is that whereas a gospel account, one of the sacred scriptures of Christianity, is a primary source for the study of the New Testament, But a movie about the New Testament is not going to be a primary source for the study of New Testament unless you are taking a class on Jesus in film, which you actually can take if you were so interested. Additionally, primary sources are the evidence of history, but they are not history. Okay? They are the evidence of history, and they need interpretation. Okay? The primary sources for this class are After the New Testament, a reader in early Christianity, cobbled together by Bart Ehrman. These are primary sources that we will be reading. You might have this older version of After the New Testament, and if you do, that's okay. Don't panic. You can still use it. There are 1 or 2 readings that are not available, and everything's numbered differently. So we might need to work a little harder and together if you have this version of the text. And again, it's fine. Secondary sources we will also be using for this course. Secondary sources, they interpret and they analyze a primary source, and they have a different kind of value in the study of history, but they are not historical evidence. Okay? A primary source is historical evidence, but it needs interpretation. A secondary source is not historical evidence, but it interprets the evidence of history. Okay? Our secondary source for this class is Early Christianity, A Brief History by Joseph Lynch. I've used this book for about a decade. It's very well done. It's not a difficult read. Not as many images and charts as I'd like, but it's not boring. The chapters are fairly concise, and it is not written for people with a background in either religion or Christianity. So he's done a fine job with this text. When you're reading the primary sources, which might be a little bit more challenging than the secondary sources, I'd like to offer you the following advice. First, use what you know to place the texts in context. And what I mean by this is create a visual world internally so that you can imagine what's happening as you are reading these texts. And yes, students of history, I'm inviting you to use your imagination. Be creative in imagining what is taking place while you are reading these texts. And if you need a visual to help with that interior context, watch the movie Gladiator. It's a great example of what the world that we are studying looked like at that time. I gotta really give Ridley Scott his props. He did a great job. Are there historical accuracies? Yes, but we can talk about those at another time. In the meantime, he does a great job of giving you a visual of 1st century Roman Empire. Second, why isn't this going? Come on. Commit key dates, names, and terms to memory. Now, I'm not expecting you to memorize every date, every name, and every term, but sometimes there are people you have to know. Sometimes there are names you need to know, and sometimes there are terms you have to know. To that end, I've created something called the Vocab tab on your Sakai site, where I have put the key dates, names, and terms that you need to know for this class. It's a pretty long list. Don't be intimidated. We'll encounter those words, and I will reinforce them through quizzes and through the lectures. Mark the text. Studies have shown that if you highlight, if you write, if you spill coffee on your texts, you will understand better what's on the page than if you just read a blank text. Now, here's where online courses can be challenging. But what's good is that for this class, you don't have an ebook. You actually have physical books that you have to use because ebooks are not available. And I am sorry, but I'm also not sorry. So I'm sorry, not sorry that you have to buy a book that you have to physically hold. I think at the end of the day, you're going to be grateful to me that I've actually given you the opportunity to step away from a stinking screen and actually hold on to something instead of just staring at something, okay? And in addition to marking the text, maybe mark the room where you read. Maybe create a wonderful, cozy space for yourself where you can read uninterrupted, something that is not a screen. Pay attention to the genre of whatever primary source you are reading, because that makes a difference If you are reading a story, that's different from a poem, that's different from a receipt, that's different from a law, that's different from a diary. The type of text that you're reading is going to make a difference in how you interpret what you're reading. Practice summarizing what it is you've just read. This is a really important quality. To be able to summarize something very quickly and tersely really can help determine if you understand what you have just read or not. As the assignments and the homework questions go on through the semester, I'll be asking you to do this. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, please be mindful of prejudice, biases, or assumptions that you encounter in the text. Not just yours, but also theirs. Remember, they don't care about what you care about, okay? And they don't have to because they're dead. All right. But authors of these sources also have their own prejudices. They also have their own biases and assumptions. So please be mindful going in that those shape the text that has been written. Finally, if you need some additional help in reading primary sources you have encountered in the lecture, this particular chart that I have created that can help you in reading primary sources. This method of contextualizing, evaluating, and then analyzing can take you through any primary source. And I'm not going to go through this whole chart because it's available for you on the lesson and you can spend some time with it on your own. Finally, the last thing I want to encourage you is about our approach to the content, okay? As we approach texts that were written sometimes more than 2,000 years ago, we need to be careful of a few things. We have to seek to understand people, ideas, practices, events, and institutions on their terms, not ours. As I said earlier, they don't care about the things that you care about, okay? So we have to keep in mind that their context, their social, economic context shapes who they are and how they understand the world, and that's different from how we understand the world, okay? Second, we need to focus on how an experience of the divine made a difference rather than on whether a person experienced something divine or not, okay? The answer to the question, did that really happen, has to always be, who cares, okay? If you're focused on whether or not something actually happened or not, you're focused on the wrong thing, okay? In the study of history, we don't care whether something actually happened or not. We care about how it's interpreted, all right? We're not actually private detectives in the same way that other disciplines are. We're dealing with text. We go from the assumption that the person in the text understood that they experienced something, and they're using their language to explain that, okay? And if this doesn't make sense, it will later. Third, we will not impose our assumptions on people living in a different time and place. They don't have access to the same things we have access to. For example, in the study of healthcare, they don't have access to microbiology, so they understand disease differently and they interpret it differently. And so we will not impose our assumptions about how the world works on other people. So we won't just assume that people who don't have microscopes are stupid, all right? And then finally, we will recognize that religion as a subject is connected to, shaped by, and influences both economic, political, and social contexts. Religion is something that is shaped by these things and also shapes them. And so that's important to keep in mind. So that's the end of this little introduction to the study of religious history. Do you have any questions about the study of religion that the lecture didn't address? Feel free to email me at isenbl@plu.edu or ask during our next tutorial. Thank you.